"Mom, I have a surprise for you," he said, and the envelope he pressed into my hands held a $700,000 debt with my name staring back at me. The living room smelled of lemon cleaner and last night's coffee, the afternoon sun cutting hard rectangles across our old carpet. My fingers stuck to the glossy bank logo as I unfolded the pages, each line colder than the next. Co-borrower, Margaret Green. Interest, 9.8%. My son's smile had flattened into a tight line, his eyes darting to the family photos on the mantel as if they might rescue him. Something inside my chest went hollow. A church bell struck and left ringing. I could hear the low hum of the fridge and the neighbor's mower outside, absurdly normal while my future calcified on letterhead. "It's just a bridge loan, Mom. 30 days, tops," he said, palms up, the same boy who once brought me dandelions, now asking me to mortgage my peace. My jaw trembled, but my voice came out steady. "When did I agree to this?" He swallowed, said the notary visit back in March. The permit thing was actually the guarantee. I looked at my hands, age spots and all, gripping paper that could swallow my paid-off house, my 401k, the retirement I'd saved for teaching third graders for 35 years. Shame rose hot in my throat, because the worst part wasn't the number. It was realizing my own son had counted on my love as collateral. You want to know how a woman like me ends up holding a $700,000 trap disguised as a surprise? I'll take you back to the whispered promises over Sunday pot roasts, the investor meetings where I sat in the lobby, the signature I was told just verifies you're my emergency contact. I'll show you the first crack in his voice, the business partner who vanished, and the night I chose between protecting my nest egg and protecting my child. Stay with me, because this isn't just about money. It's about the debt we inherit and the one we create. And if you believe a mother deserves honesty before a bill, subscribe and follow my story to the end. My name is Margaret Green, and I am 66 years old. Most mornings in Westerville start the same way for me. A pot of coffee, the kind I've been buying since the kids at Maple Grove called me Mrs. Green, a slow hum of WOSU on the radio, the crossword and the list of small things that anchor a day. I've worked hard to make my house a quiet place, the sort of home where you can hear the fridge at noon and the Cardinals at 5. I know exactly which board in the hallway creaks and which window catches in the sticky August heat. I paid it off one frugal month at a time, after-school tutoring, summer's shelving books at the library, and all the careful ways a third-grade teacher learns to stretch a dollar. The walls have seen school projects, birthday banners, and every shade of a Midwestern sunset. I thought they had seen enough. So when my son, Daniel, 34, and still somehow the boy who loved orange slices at half-time, handed me an envelope and called it a surprise, I had no reason to make my coffee stronger. He was pale that day, in the glare of a hot Ohio afternoon, the kind of light that makes dust look like confetti. Lemon cleaner hung in the air because I liked the smell of order. He brought me paper-ruled chaos. The bank logo caught the light, the edges stiff against my fingers. 700,000. Co-borrower. My name. Interest almost 10%. His smile flattened, the muscles around his mouth working the way they did when he was learning to blow a decent bubblegum bubble. He said bridge loan like it was a harmless little footbridge over Alum Creek, like I could stroll it and be home in time to baste a chicken. 30 days, tops. I kept my voice even, a trick from years of calming classrooms after indoor recess. When did I agree to this? The answer was a story I had already lived once and didn't recognize since he dressed it up with words like permit thing and emergency contact. The notary visit back in March. Mom, just need you to verify you know me if they call. It's one of those silly formalities. Had apparently been a signature that put my house, my 401k, the retirement I had saved by saying no to ocean vacations and yes to packing lunches, on the line. Underneath the hurt, there was a thin, cold layer of something else. Shame. Not because of the debt, but because my son had assumed my love could be signed and notarized without me understanding it. Because he had counted on that love more than he had counted on the math. Mom, he said, palms up. This is just to get us through inspections. Kyle says the market's softening, but we've got 2 properties ready. One on West Mound and the bungalow up in Clintonville. We can refinance. This is nothing. 30 days. Kyle, the partner I had only seen in photographs, always wearing a blazer without a tie, as if professionalism could be purchased like a coat. Kyle, who had vanished once already when the roof leaked on Livingston Avenue. Outside, the neighbor's mower droned its suburban drone, the kind of normal that makes the abnormal float above the carpet like a bad dream. I looked at the photos on the mantel. Daniel in his soccer uniform, a gap-toothed grin holding a Best Citizen ribbon from 3rd grade. Him and his father at Hoover Reservoir with muddy knees and fishing poles. Behind those frames was my husband's portrait. Tom left this world quietly after a winter of hospital blankets and whispers in antiseptic hallways. It was Tom and me who planned for this house to be ours, free and clear, so I could sleep without numbers marching across my ceiling. I set the papers down and made us both a cup of coffee, because habits steer me when the road tilts. Daniel didn't want any, said his stomach was shot. He stared at the kitchen island we had picked out when the laminate bubbled, the one he and his father installed on a long Saturday that ended in pizza and the Buckeyes on TV. I wish you'd told me, I said. I am telling you, he said, too quick, the words bumping into each other. Now. You had me sign something I didn't understand. You do understand, Mom. You're the smartest woman I know. We talked about this, back in March. I remembered March. The snow shrink-wrapping itself to the yard, dirty and stubborn, the sky the color of old jeans. He had brought me to the UPS store off State Street. He kept saying, permit, just permit, and if they ask, you're my emergency contact. It was busy in there, people mailing birthday books to nieces and returns to companies I never heard of. The notary had a name tag and a kind smile. He flipped through pages like flipping through a magazine, pen tapping where I should initial, boxes to check that I took at face value. I had my reading glasses on, and I still missed that the line where he pointed said, co-borrower, not contact. It did not say what he said. It said, I had chosen to trust the boy I raised because love is a strong habit too. Daniel, I said, this isn't a permit. This is everything. He looked at the floor, at the lemon-clean tiles, and I recognized the tilt of his head as the tilt it took when he was caught with his hand in the cookie jar at 6. He used to cry then, fat tears rolling down, but now he talked faster. Mom, the bank wouldn't touch me without a guarantee. Everyone does it. It's how you get started. Kyle's parents helped him get his first duplex. You always say you believe in me. I do believe in you, I said, and meant it, which hurt more. I also believe in reading what I sign. He laughed once then, a small sound that wasn't a laugh. You're making this bigger than it is. That was the moment I saw it plain. The little signs I had tuned out because they were easier to love through than to confront. The jokes at Sunday supper about my coupons? Mom could put Kroger out of business. The way his voice changed to gentle condescension when I asked about the flipping business. It's complicated. You wouldn't get it. The texts that took him days to answer if I asked about money, but minutes if I offered to bring over a casserole. The investor meeting where he asked me to sit in the lobby to look out for my backpack, and I sat there with a People magazine from last month while he shook hands upstairs. The way he talked about other people who didn't have the stomach for risk, like caution, was a moral failing. I remember the first time he showed me a house he and Kyle had bought. It was on a crooked street in Franklinton, a little place with a front porch that slumped like a tired shoulder. He walked through it, calling out to me from different rooms as if he could sell me the echo. We take down this wall, open up the kitchen, new cabinets here, white shaker, Mom, very HGTV, quartz counters if the budget fits, open concept cells. Look how much light. He talked about light as if he invented it. We stood in what would be the living room, walls stripped to studs, and he explained ARV and cap rates and hold time as if reciting a catechism. I nodded and asked dumb questions because I didn't want him to see the part of me that couldn't turn the word home into a spreadsheet heap. I wanted him to be proud of me like he was when I made those Halloween costumes, the astronaut suit out of a spray-painted box for the oxygen pack, the foil-wrapped helmet, the way he wore that thing to bed 2 nights because he felt like he could leave the earth. We used to invent our own constellations on nights the power flickered out. He would ask me why the scar on the moon never healed, and I'd tell him it was old, but resilient. I wanted him to remember that woman. I wanted to remember her, too. "Daniel," I said, my hands on the papers, "show me everything, every paper, every number." He pulled his phone out like that would save him. Banking apps, screenshots of Zillow. He talked in circles until we landed back on the same island of words where the coffee had gone cold. 30 days, tops. After he left, the house felt different. The fridge hummed offbeat. The quiet had edges. I walked through the rooms, my palm on the wall as if I could absorb the steadiness of paint. In the small bedroom that I turned into a sewing nook after retirement, I touched the drawer where I keep the quilt squares for the babies we make quilts for at church. Under the window, I still had a low bookcase for the books the kids loved. Charlotte's Web, Ramona, Where the Red Fern Grows. My life has been small in the kindest way. It was enough. I stood at the sink washing the coffee cups, though there was nothing on them worth the effort, then dried them and put them away as if order could reverse a signature. The phone sat on the counter like a stone. I called Ellen from next door. "We've been borrowing sugar and casseroles from each other for 30 years. She answered breathy like she always does when she's pruning her hydrangeas. I told her in a voice I hoped sounded normal that I might have made a mistake. She said to come over. The light in their kitchen is different, warmer, because of the yellow paint Bob chose. We sat at the table that has a little nick in it, where her grandson dropped his sippy cup, and she brought me tea and shortbread. I told her. She said, "Oh, Maggie," and put her hand over mine and held it, her hands always softer because she uses lotion that smells like almonds. She asked if I wanted Bob to take a look. Bob isn't a lawyer or a banker, but he has the kind of patience that reads manuals. That night, I slept the sort of sleep that is not sleep. You close your eyes, and the mind runs a treadmill. I could see the word co-borrower in my mind, in a font that felt like a shout. At 2 a.m, I thought of the day we took Daniel to get his braces tightened, him pale, but trying to be brave, and the way we stopped for a Frosty because that was the only thing that made his mouth not ache. At 3, I thought of Tom bringing home a used baby bike from a garage sale with training wheels we painted red, and the way his laugh filled the garage and bounced off the lawnmower. At 4, I thought of my own mother, who hid cash in a coffee can. I wondered what she would say. I feared I already knew. In the morning, I did what teachers do. I made a list. Call the bank listed on the letterhead. Look up the loan number. Call the Attorney General's office. Call a legal aid clinic. Look for the notary name. Check my folder from March, the one with all the boring but necessary papers, where neatness and my fear of misplacing things has made me look like a person who knows what she's doing. The bank had a name that sounded like a tree, Redwood Capital, with a logo of an upward arrow hidden in the trunk. I sat at the dining table with my reading glasses and called. A young man answered and called me ma'am, and I wanted to tell him not to. He asked for the loan number and my social, and I gave him things I knew by heart. Then he said, cheerful, like someone reading me my fortune, "Yes, Ms. Green, you are listed as a co-borrower on the short-term bridge facility. Maturity date is 30 calendar days from January draw. There is an extension fee available at 2 points per month if—" "What about my house?" I asked. He paused, the sound of him scrolling down a page. "We do have a deed of trust recorded as security on the co-borrower's primary residence." My hand went cold. "How?" He said I signed. I asked him to send me copies of everything I signed. He said he would without using the word sorry once. He did not sound unkind, just as if none of this was personal to him, because it wasn't. The first time I co-signed for Daniel, he was 19 and needed a used truck that didn't sound like a cough. He looked at me above the dealership coffee with what he thought was confidence. Tom said no. I said, let me think. I signed that time, and the alternator went 3 months later, and there we were in our garage on a Sunday with a Haynes manual and a borrowed socket wrench, getting elbow grease on my old Ohio State sweatshirt. He paid that one off. I had folded that into my understanding of him. I told myself he learned. He might have. but he also learned I had ink in my pen for him. There were other sacrifices, the sort a mother makes and then makes invisible, so they don't look like selling your heart for parts. The year Tom got laid off from the plant, and I took an extra tutoring job at the Christian Center off Cleveland Avenue. The mornings I got up at 5 to bake muffins so the kids wouldn't know the cereal was almost gone until I got paid. The summer we skipped Cedar Point, even though Danny had traced the roller coasters on the map with his finger. The time I sold my grandmother's ring to fix the water heater and told the children a story about how Grandma wanted them to have hot baths. The weekends I directed the church pageant and mended shepherd costumes on the couch. The coats bought on sale in February for next winter. The bullies I learned to ignore at PTA meetings when they rolled their eyes because I brought carrot sticks instead of cupcakes. It isn't that I kept a ledger. It's that there were 1,000 big little yesies and many no-ways I turned into later yesies. And out of those bricks, we built a boy who thought he could ask anything because I never taught him the limit. I taught Columbus students how to line up and raise their hands and look each other in the eye and say please and thank you. I may have forgotten to teach Daniel that same thing when it came to me. I called the notary next. There was a name at the bottom of one of the scanned pages Redwood emailed. It was a name I recognized, but only barely, a neat signature under a rubber stamp on a corner of the document with a little circle around where I wrote my name. I drove to the UPS store and asked if he worked there. The clerk looked at me kindly and gave me a number. I sat in my car in the parking lot with its potholes and trees that had the gall to be so green and called. The notary remembered me. He remembered the day because there had been a woman who argued about the price of a mailbox, and I was patient behind her. He remembered my son's smile. He had me sign a logbook that day. He had asked for my ID. He had pointed at places with that same pen and watched me initial. He said he never explains the papers. He isn't allowed. He said people ask, but he says, ask the person who brought you. He said it with a tone people use when they want you not to hang your grief on them. I didn't. He'd done his job, and I hadn't done mine. Sometimes I go walking at Hoover when the world feels too tight. I drove there then, though the day was thick and the geese were in a mood. The reservoir lay spread out like a cool answer to a hot question. I walked the path where the trees throw the kind of shade that makes you think of childhood summers. A group of kids in neon swim shirts ran past me with wet hair. A mother called, "Watch for bikes," and the smallest turned to wave at me because children are like that. I thought about my classroom at the start of each year. The first day, I would crouch at the door and greet each child like they were a miracle. I meant it, even when they scowled. If a miracle sat in front of you and asked for an impossible thing, would you say no? I walked until I felt my legs, and not just my fear. The sky clouded, and then it didn't. Ohio does that to keep you from being too sure. When I got home, I found I couldn't eat. I made soup anyway and put it in containers, the way I do. I called Grace United and left a message for Pastor Susan. She called me back after dinner and listened without the little brace of disapproval I was braced for. She said money and love get tangled in the best families. She said there are resources for elder financial abuse, even if we hate the sound of those words. She said that even faithful boys make unfaithful choices when they're scared. She asked me what I wanted. I said I didn't want to lose my house. She said that was a good start. All that night, I thought of the stone prayer I keep in the kitchen window. Wisdom. It's smooth from being touched. I clicked the lamps off one by one like little blessings. In the hall, I paused at the picture of Daniel at 14, hair in his eyes, a little too much swagger in his slouch. He had widened the world and then gotten lost in it. The first time he said he wanted to do real estate, he was at my table with a laptop and a legal pad full of numbers, and a video paused on an online course where a cheerful man in a blazer said anyone could build wealth. "Mom," Daniel had said, "you and Dad never got to retire early. I can. I'm going to make it so you never worry about money again." I had smiled in that way that is both hope and a careful protection against hope. I had baked a pot roast that Sunday and set it in front of him with carrots and onions and a dish of green beans almondine. He chewed and talked numbers, and I got out my notebook and wrote down the names he said. Hard money lender, bridge loan, proof of funds. I learned enough to think I knew. It is dangerous to understand a little. In the morning, I called the Legal Aid Society. The woman on the phone sounded like someone who has taped together a lot of broken maps. She said to come in. I put on the blue blouse that makes me look less tired and my sensible shoes. In the waiting area, a little boy looked at my hands and asked me why I have spots. I told him it's what happens when the sun loves you for a long time. His mother smiled with a mouth too tight. The lawyer who saw me was young, with kind eyes and a tie with tiny bicycles on it. He taught me words I wanted to pretend away. Predatory lending, elder fraud. He said they see it all the time, but that doesn't make it okay. He asked me if I remembered the day in March in detail. Every detail. I told him about the snow and the woman and the pen and the way my son had steered me with his hand on my elbow like you steer someone whose ankle might twist. He nodded. He said maybe there was a misrepresentation. Maybe we could argue about the purpose and the way it was described to me. He said the notary couldn't help, but the way my son had described it, if I wrote it down at the time or told someone, we might have a thread to pull. He asked me if I had. I had texted Ellen, I realized. I pulled out my phone and scrolled. There it was. March 18th. At UPS with Danny. Signing this permit thing for his work. We'll be at book club at 7. It sat in that chat like a small boat. The lawyer said to email it to him. He said to keep everything. He said not to sign anything else. He said we had to contact Redwood and ask for a full accounting and any recordings of calls. He said some lenders record everything. Do I call the police? I asked, and felt foolish when the word hung there. He said sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. He said the best first call might be to my son. He said to ask him to come with all his paperwork and sit at my table with it and a calculator and someone else present. He said I needed someone else watching my face because hurt makes a different kind of math. On my way home, I stopped at Schmidt's and bought cream puffs because when the world feels wobbly, I anchor with small joy. I ate one in the car and licked powdered sugar off my fingers like a little girl and laughed once at myself because even then I was making sure not to get crumbs on the seat. I called Daniel and told him to come for supper. He said he had a thing. I said, "This is the thing." He said he'd be here. I made meatloaf and mashed potatoes because sometimes you need food with certainty to it. Ellen came over with coleslaw and sat at the far end of the table like a calm witness. Daniel arrived, eyes shadowed and wild at the edges. He had a folder. He had the face of someone who thinks papers can fix a heart. I put the food on the table, and we ate in silence for a minute, because fork to plate is a language too. Then I said, "We're going to go through every paper and every number. This is my friend here to help. This is going to be frank. We will not raise our voices. We will not turn our eyes away." He smiled in that way that's not a smile. "Mom, this is dramatic." "It is honest," I said. He set out papers like dominoes, closing statements, draws from the bank, an email from Kyle that said, "Hang tight, we'll pivot." There were names I had never heard, LLCs with Ohio-sounding names, Buckeye Restoration Group, Broad and Wall Development. There were invoices for materials, a roofer named Luis, a plumber named Mike. There were texts between him and Kyle. "This lender is squeezing us. We need the extension. Do you think Mom would help again?" A chill moved through me, as if someone opened a door. Again. Had I helped before and called it something else? I remembered the March day, the coffee after, the way he hugged me long, the thank you that leaned into my shoulder. I had told myself it was for his permit. When I had paid the closing costs on his townhome 7 years ago, we had called it an advance, and then called it even because he painted my porch and changed a light fixture. I thought we were square. Square is a shape with equal sides. Love leans. "Where is Kyle?" I asked. "He's negotiating," Daniel said. "Where is he? In this room? In this state?" My voice dropped to the tone I used with children who think if they look at the floor will answer for them. He took out his phone, texted. No answer. He shrugged, and it was a teenager's shrug. "He's under a lot of pressure. We both are. Who signed my house onto this without telling me?" I asked. He didn't look at me. Mom. Say the name, I said. He swallowed. I did. Ellen cleared her throat softly, the sound she makes in church when a soloist goes flat. I remember thinking how even then, my brain noticed small kindnesses. I folded my hands on the table. I wanted to take his face in my hands, like when he was little, and tell him the world was big enough to fix this. But the world is big and not always kind, and I am not a miracle worker. I am his mother. Here is what is going to happen, I said. I have an appointment tomorrow with a lawyer at Legal Aid. You are going to come. You are going to bring all of your papers. You are going to make copies at the library if you must. You are going to be honest, even when it feels like you are breaking a bone. If Kyle doesn't show up, you will tell me everything he knows and everything he owes. We will ask the bank for recordings and for an accounting. We will ask about any rescission rights. We will ask for the extension in writing if that is what is next, and we will think about what it costs. I will not sign anything else. I will not give you one more penny. I will not sell this house. If the law says I signed, then we will fight within the law. But we will not pretend anymore. Do you understand? He nodded. He has my eyes, and in that moment, they looked like they were looking at a mirror we both disliked. I never wanted to hurt you, he said, and it was a child's voice. I know, I said. You wanted to be someone else's hero, and you used me as your cape. He looked at his plate. He whispered, I thought I was protecting you. By risking the one thing I asked you never to risk, I said, not unkind. Tom and I had told him once, sitting at this table, that the house was the bastion. I used that word and made him look it up, and he came back and said fortress with a smile. We finished the meal with small sentences and larger silences. He left with the folder. Ellen squeezed my shoulder at the door. You did good, she said, which is what she says when the pie turns out, and also when the news is bad and there is no pie. That week became a pattern of calls and copies. The bank sent me the audio of one call where my son had asked a loan officer about including me. You could hear the chirp of his text notifications. You could hear the way he said, my mom's on board. You could hear the man's professional voice say, she'll need to initial here and here if she's guaranteeing. You could hear my son say, she'll be fine, with a smile that the audio somehow conveyed. I do not know if it will help me legally, but it told me something I needed to hear. My son knew exactly how far he was walking me out onto that bridge. He told himself it was over water that barely reached our ankles. The current, however, is not something love can change with wishful thinking. Kyle never came. He sent an email from a different account, a terse apology that looked like a template. The lawyer said we'd add him to the complaint. He said words like deposition and discovery, words with teeth. I signed papers at the legal aid office that outlined what they could do. I felt both safer and mournful, the way you do under an umbrella in a storm. You're dry, but the rain is a fact. At church that Sunday, I nearly didn't go because I didn't want anyone to see me with a secret. Secrets have weight. They change your posture. But I went and sat in the fourth pew where the light comes through the stained glass in little squares. We sang, Great is thy faithfulness, and I cried without choking, which is its own kind of grace. After the service, Pastor Susan tipped her head. A question. I nodded. Mrs. Alvarez from the choir handed me a folded dollar for the quilt ministry and squeezed my fingers. She wears the softest sweaters. The little acts of tenderness were like stitches holding a hem. Bob found me in the fellowship hall, where the coffee is always too weak and the donuts are always too dry, and he told me he had a friend at the city who could check the permits on the properties. It turns out the house in Clintonville had failed inspection twice for electrical reasons, and someone had kept the sticker in a drawer. That drew a shape around this I did not like. Daniel insisted he didn't know about the second fail. I wanted to believe him, and sometimes I did, and other times I didn't, and my heart learned how to hold both positions like you hold a plank. The day I drove downtown to meet with a representative from Redwood, it was hot, and the mirrored building made the sky look like it had fallen into the city. The lobby smelled like cold stone and a hint of citrus, the way buildings try to smell expensive. I walked past a fountain that looked like it was whispering to itself. My shoes clicked on the tile, and I thought of every instance of that sound in my life. The school hallways, the courtrooms when I served jury duty, the hospital floors. I had my folder with tabs and sticky notes. I had a little candy bar in my purse because sometimes sugar keeps you from saying something you can't take back. The woman from Redwood wore a blazer the color of mint and had nails the color of a barn. She smiled tight. She said things like, "I'm so sorry for the confusion, and we take these matters very seriously." She pushed a stack of papers across the table with a manicured finger. She showed me my signature and my initials, small fish swimming in dangerous water. She said, "You do see, Ms. Green, that you acknowledged the deed of trust." I said, "I see that I didn't understand the boat I was stepping into." She said, "We have 30-day terms for a reason." I said, "If the reason is to make people panic, it's effective." She didn't smile. Her eyes did that thing corporate eyes do, holding empathy like a vase they're willing to show but not willing to lower. "Your son," she said, and stopped. "My son," I said. She told me about their extension option, and I asked the cost. She told me we could revisit after the initial maturity date, and I told her revisiting is not a plan. The lawyer beside me, whose tie had bicycles, cleared his throat politely and asked for a supervisor to join. He asked to see the underwriting notes. He said words like procedural irregularities and disclosure. He made me proud, this child who was not mine, with his careful courage. When we left, he said to me on the sidewalk, "They heard you." He also said, "Hearing is not the same as agreeing." We stood in the heat while a food truck across the way sold tacos to a line of people whose day was their own. I thought about buying one, about how tacos taste like summer you can hold. I did not buy one. My stomach had other plans. At home, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea and watched a thunderstorm gather itself on the horizon, the sky going that particular Midwestern bruise color. The maple leaves turned their pale sides out and the wind lifted the hair at my temples. Daniel texted me 3 times. First, "How'd it go?" Then, "Kyle is freaking out." Then, "I'm sorry." I answered only the first one with a fact. We met with them. We have 30 days. We're working on it. I did not reassure him because I have decided to stop cushioning his landings with my own bones. I will hold out my hand to him, but I will not lay down as a bridge. He will need to find his own footing. He may not like me for it. There are worse things. There is a part of me that wants to rewind to the days when my biggest money worry was whether the book fair would push the kids to beg their parents for things they couldn't afford, and whether my polite "no book fair this year" would be met with a sigh from the principal. There is a part of me that wants to hold the dollar bills from my wallet up to the light and cry for my grandmother's coffee can. But there is also a part of me that has learned to live in the present as it is. The present contains a boy who has not been a boy for a long time and who is learning something hard. The present contains a house that has walls I dust and windows I can see out of, and it is now a house I am prepared to stand in front of if I need to. I have begun to tell a few more people. Dolores from the library, whose hair has been the same perfect gray bob for 20 years, told me she once had to tell her son no when he asked for a second credit card. She said he didn't speak to her for a year, and then later, he thanked her. "Sometimes love means closing a door gently but firmly," she said, checking out my mysteries. At the grocery store, I stood in front of the lemons and remembered why I love their smell. I bought a bag anyway. At home, I cut one open, and the shape of its brightness made the kitchen feel, briefly, like itself again. The larger conflict is a calendar now. 30 days. Tops, he had said, as if it were a maximum of inconvenience. It is exactly the time it takes for a habit to form. I am forming this one, saying yes to my own safety. The days are full of little work, letters, copies, phone calls, notes. My pen scratches. My voice stays even. When I get tired, I sit on the back steps and watch the lightning bugs practice their magic. In the dark, they tell me stubbornness can glow. On Sundays, I make pot roast because some rituals are not about denial, but about making room for strength. Daniel comes by more now, which is both kind and strategic. He asks about my day, and I tell him truths that are not about him. I tell him Mrs. Shepherd's cat had kittens, and the church quilt got its binding on. He tells me he's applied for a job at a contractor's to make steady money while they sort the houses. He tells me he hates Kyle, but I hear the part of him that hates looking in the mirror more. He asks me if I can forgive him. I tell him forgiveness is a road, and we've stepped on it. I do not tell him where it ends. Endings depend on whether people keep walking. Once, when he was 9 and he had done something small and wrong, I had him write, "I will tell the truth" 10 times on lined paper. He did it in block letters and then in curly, like script might make it fancy. He brought it to me and I said, "What have you learned?" He said, "That my hand hurts." I laughed then and told him to think again. He said finally, that telling the truth is hard. It was. It is. But I believe people can choose to do hard things. There is a nervousness in the way the air in the house feels now, like before a storm. But there is also something else. Resolve. I think of Tom, who was a quiet man until he wasn't, and how we made this life together with more effort than drama. He would have said, "We will handle it one nail at a time." He would have gone to the garage and cleaned his tools in that way he did when he was thinking. I go to the sewing machine and stitch quilt squares together, tiny pieces making a bigger pattern. There is comfort in aligning edges and pressing seams. I pick fabrics that make sense together. I wish that's how people worked. Maybe it is, slowly. I keep the letter from Redwood in a folder with a new label. Papers, important. I keep a photo of Daniel at 6 in the same folder because it reminds me why I am doing this and also why I am drawing the line. The debt I hold now is more than money. It is the debt of teaching him what love is as many times as it takes and what it is not. It is not the quietest voice in the room. It is not signatures concealed in errands. It is not the presumption that a mother will torch her own future to light her child's. The calendar hangs in the kitchen. I mark off days with a small X, like my mother did during Advent when we were waiting for something good. I do not know yet how this ends. Maybe we find a legal hole in the net. Maybe we work out a payment plan that does not ruin me. Maybe we do not. I know this. I am more than a co-borrower. I am Margaret Green. I have paid off a house and taught 100 children how to read and bandage knees and balanced budgets with coupons and creativity. I have grieved a husband and planted perennials that bloom in spite of April snow. I can stand in the bank and the sanctuary and my own kitchen and say what needs saying. I can look at my son and love him without letting him use me as a ladder he doesn't learn to climb. The sun sets late in June here, drawing the line between day and night like a chalk mark you can see from the back row of the classroom. I stand at the sink and watch it go. The lemon cleaner smells like ordinary again. The fridge hums a steady hum. The mower next door starts up, and it sounds like a small town, which is somehow a comfort even in the suburbs. I breathe in and out. I put the kettle on because habits take care of us. My phone buzzes on the counter. It's a text from a number I don't recognize, a curt message from someone at Redwood. Please confirm receipt of new documentation by Friday. It is signed with a name that is not a tree. I type back, "Received. We will respond." I add, "Thank you, because it costs me nothing and it keeps me me." The story is not over. The days ahead carry weight, and I am carrying them anyway. I straighten the stack of papers, smooth the creases, and turn out the lights. In the dark, I feel for the edge of the table and find it. I know where I am in my own house. That is a kind of wealth. Tomorrow I will call and copy and ask and keep and insist. Tomorrow I will make my coffee. Tomorrow I will walk at Hoover and count the geese and let the air do what it does best, which is to remind a person that lungs still work. Tomorrow I will sit across from my son and we will make a list that begins with this. Here is what we will no longer do to each other. Here is what we will try. And outside, maybe, the neighbor will mow again, cutting straight lines into a lawn that grows whether you ask it to or not. The first deadline came in an envelope with a green return receipt card for me to sign. The mailman, Jim, who has brought me catalogs and Christmas cards and sympathy notes for years, stood on my stoop with the careful face people put on when they sense bad news that isn't theirs. His pen scratched on the little line where I wrote M. Green, and when he handed me the certified letter, his eyes slid to my hydrangeas, polite on purpose. Inside was the kind of letter that uses words like notice and default, as if courtesy were expensive ink. I sat at the dining table, the afternoon sun cutting those same rectangles across the carpet, and unfolded the stiff paper. The edges felt like a ruler against my skin. They had recorded the deed of trust on my house. The loan had matured, a word I always loved when it was about a child, and now hated when it was about something with a due date. They were offering an extension at a cost that read like a little riddle. 2 points per month, fees to be itemized, interest to capitalize. There was a list of phone numbers. There was not one apology. I took the letter down to the basement and opened the old file box where I keep the papers that tether a life. Birth certificates, the title to the Corolla we don't need to impress anyone with, the program from Tom's service, the scribbled ledger that lists my bills, the receipt from the last time I had the gutters cleaned. I pulled out the manila folder that says house in my careful teacher script and found the release of mortgage the bank mailed us the year we paid it off. I remember that day, like I remember the smell of the school library, cool and a bit like dust and hope. Tom and I had framed the release in cheap wood and hung it in the hallway for a month like a diploma. Then, worried about sun fading the ink, I put it in the file with a silly little ceremony, me smoothing the paper, Tom looking down with that shy smile he wore when he was proud. I brought that release upstairs and laid it beside the new document, 2 versions of our life on the table. My hands reached for the small stone that sits in the kitchen window, the one etched with the word wisdom. But I didn't lift it. I didn't want to borrow steadiness. I wanted to find my own. We had been to legal aid. The young lawyer with the bicycle tie had sent a letter to Redwood asking for copies of disclosures, of any recorded calls, of their internal notes. He'd also filed a complaint with the Ohio Attorney General's office, a simple online form with a long, heavy title, Elder Financial Exploitation. He had told me to consider recording any call with the lender if my state allowed it. Ohio does with consent, and I am nothing if not proper. He had told me to go to the Franklin County Recorder's office and pull my own copy of the recorded deed of trust, because sometimes documents wear clarity better on the county site than they do in a lender's packet. That morning, I drove downtown, parked in a garage where the concrete ramps feel like a child's toy car track, and took the elevator up to the floor with the maps on the wall. The recorder's office has that government building smell, a mix of air conditioning and toner and tired coffee. A young woman with bright nail polish showed me how to search my name. My name appeared in the neat little rectangles of the computer screen, the lines of a record that did not care. It was my life. There it was, the deed of trust, my signature in tiny digital form next to a scanned stamp. The clerk printed it for me, the warm paper slipping into my hands. "If you believe this was done in error," she said in a voice so gentle I wanted to lie and say yes, "there's a process. There's also a way to file an affidavit. It doesn't undo it, but it adds your words to the record." Words on the record. It sounded like a teacher's dream and a mother's last resort. I thanked her. In the lobby, a man in a suit smiled at me and slipped me a card that said, in a confident font, "We buy homes cash." I slid it into my purse and later, at home, slid it straight into the recycling, though I read his first name twice and how he'd spelled it like an apology. Humiliation, I have learned, also arrives in small notes. A woman at book club frowned at the title I chose, an old mystery. And then, when I told them what was going on, because my hands would not stop shaking when I poured the decaf, said, "I'd never sign anything I hadn't read." She meant well. She likes to mean well in public. I nodded and chewed the store-bought cookies because I hadn't been able to bake. Ellen squeezed my knee under the table, an electrical current of friendship. My phone buzzed in my purse, a number I didn't recognize, And when I let it go to voicemail and later listened, it was a cheerful young man from a company whose name sounded like a hedge called Hedge and Harbor, asking if I'd considered a cash-out refinance. He said it like a treat. Daniel came by the next day with a new paper in his hands, a bright rectangle of hope he wanted me to paste over a crack. "It's a simple extension," he said. "We just need you to initial so we can get another 30 days. The buyers on Westmount are close. They love the subway tile, and we can close Clintonville if we—" He stopped because my face stopped him. The way I looked at him felt like a door closing, and it hurt both of us. "Put it down," I said, my voice the register I used when a child in my class reached for the scissors the wrong way. "We will not sign anything today, or any day soon." "Mom," he said, and set the paper down, but kept his fingers on a corner as if it might blow away. "They'll foreclose. They'll actually do it. I can't sleep. You need to be honest," I said, and the word need rang in the air like the bell between periods. "Not just with me, with them. There are no more signatures in this house that fix your problem by making it mine. There are other ways." He made that tight smile I was beginning to know too well. "Like what? Sue them? Sue me?" "Like standing up in the room where this started," I said, and the idea formed in the marrow of me in the middle of the night like all the best and worst ideas took shape as I said it. "Where you learned those words. Those rooms where men in blazers say anyone can do this if they hustle. Where people nod when someone says, 'Just have your mom co-sign like it's nothing.' There's a meeting, isn't there? The one you go to, the investors group, the one near Polaris with the bad coffee. You told me once they have a segment at the end where people stand up and say what they have and what they need." He blinked. "REI meeting. It's this Thursday." "I'll be there," I said. "And I will tell them the cost of what you call nothing. I will say my name and say my age and say the word house and the word trust. I will look them in the eye and say what I will not do. They can hear it from a mother's mouth. If they teach each other how to flip houses, they can hear how it feels when the house pushes back." He stared at me. "People look different when they finally see you standing in a place you chose and not a place they moved you to." His mouth opened and closed. "That will ruin me." "It might save you," I said, and it felt like both punishment and mercy. "I won't lie to you in private or in public. If your friends find that inconvenient, perhaps they are not friends." After he left, my legs felt like sand. I walked to the hallway and stood in front of the photos. Daniel's Best Citizen ribbon hung a little crooked on the corner of his third-grade picture, the one where his teeth came in at their own pace and his hair wouldn't obey the comb. The ribbon was cheap satin, the kind you get for showing up and then being the sort of child other children can lean on. I unpinned it from the frame and rubbed the edge between my fingers. The tiny gold letters had faded a little from years of our Ohio sun. I remembered that day, how he'd come home bouncing, how Tom had lifted him, how we'd had lasagna, because I believe in celebrating character as a bigger thing than achievement. I took the ribbon to my dresser and fastened it to the inside of my sweater with an old safety pin. I pin things inside my clothes sometimes when I need the secret thought of them close. That ribbon felt like an anchor and a question. Was that little boy still in there? I would speak as if he was. I also put my old red grading pen in my purse. It's a Pilot Precise V5, the kind that glides. I always made a point of writing good beside corrections. I wanted to carry that habit with me. I tucked the release of mortgage paper in a clear plastic sleeve, the way we did with book reports that deserved the bulletin board. The day before the meeting, someone taped a notice to my front door. I peeled it off with fingers I hoped my neighbors couldn't see shaking. It wasn't a foreclosure notice, not yet, but it was a notice to cure. 10 days. The word cure made me think of medicines and broth and patience, and here it meant pay. I walked to the threshold with it and stood there. That line we cross a dozen times a day without thinking. I thought of every time my children burst in with snow on their boots and every time Tom carried groceries in with a little whoosh of satisfaction. A truck rolled by. The driver looked down at me, then away with the quickness of a person who registers a thing and then pretends not to have. Ellen's screen door opened a crack across the street, then closed again. I went inside and shut my door gently, the way you shut a child's bedroom when they've fallen asleep. That night, the storm the sky had been building all afternoon finally arrived. Rain walked across the street like a line of people with umbrellas. I turned the lamps on and the radio low. Wosu was playing a piece I didn't know. It had a piano that sounded like rain falling on glass. I wrote out what I would say, not word for word, but bones. My hand cramped, a stranger after retirement to the long arc of a pen. I wrote, "My name is Margaret Green. I am 66. I am a retired teacher. My husband and I paid off our house the year our son left for college. My son is a grown man. I love him." He asked me to sign a paper he called a permit. It was not. I wrote, "A business model that requires a mother's house is a business model that cannot stand without a lie." I wrote, "If you are teaching young men and women to ask for signatures in the lobby of a UPS store, you are teaching theft without the decency to call it that." I wrote, "I will not sign anything else. I will not be your bridge. I will be standing on the bank, calling to you to swim." I called the group's number and asked, explaining nothing, if guests could have a minute to speak. The woman said the last part of the meeting was open mic, 2 minutes per person. She said, "Bring business cards." I said I'd bring my words. She laughed a little, a friendly laugh that said she'd heard everything and believed little. Thursday came. I wore my blue blouse and my sensible shoes, and after a long look in the mirror, pinned the Best Citizen ribbon to the inside of my cardigan near my heart. I could feel its scratchy edge. It felt like an old friend walking beside me. Ellen came, insisting even when I said no, and sat beside me in the car, quiet in the way that makes noise unnecessary. We parked outside the hotel in Polaris, the kind of chain place with a small garden out front, trying its best against a broad expanse of parking lot. The carpet inside was the pattern of too many leaves in colors that disguise stains. Men and women stood around clutching plastic name badges, talking in the particular patter of optimism, ARV, hard money, due diligence, comps. There were folding tables with cups of coffee and cardboard, little pink packets of sweetener, a plate of store-bought cookies sweating under plastic wrap. The air conditioning was set to the place where you are always aware of your elbows. Daniel was not at the door. For a moment, I hoped he had decided to stay home, to let me do this without seeing his eyes. Then I saw him at the front of the room, talking to a man I knew must be Kyle by the way my hands went cold. He was everything his photographs promised. Tidy hair, expensive shoes, that blazer with no tie. There is a kind of man who dresses like business and fun are both costumes he can shrug on and off. He scanned me as if I were a stray figure in a spreadsheet. His eyes slid right over me and then back, not because he recognized me, but because he recognized anything that might interrupt his plan. Daniel's face changed when he saw me. He looked 13. It struck me, absurd and fierce at the same time, that I had promised him once when he was 5 and afraid of swimming lessons, that I would sit on the bleachers until he could do it without me. I had meant the pool. Look at me now, sitting in another kind of bleachers, waiting to see if he would sink or kick. We took a seat near the back. Ellen took out a small notebook because she is a friend who knows that the record matters. People clapped dutifully when the organizer, an older man with an earnest tie and a folder full of flyers for a weekend seminar, went through housekeeping. There was a presentation by a contractor who talked about avoiding scams, and I wrote in the margin of my paper the word irony like a tiny private laugh. Then came haves and wants, the part where people lined up near the wall and waited their turn at the microphone like kids at show and tell. A woman went first and said she had a duplex in Oldtown East. A young man with nervous hands said he had cash buyers. A man with a voice that carried said he wanted a partner for a flip, low equity in, high returns. The organizer kept it moving. After 4 people, he gestured to the line and said, "Keep it brief, folks." I stood. Ellen squeezed my wrist. My knees felt their age going up that shallow carpeted step. I could smell coffee and cologne and the faintest hint of drywall dust. The microphone was sticky at the edge with the fingerprints of other hands. I looked at the room, not for a friend, but for a human. There were faces of all kinds, hopeful and hungry, skeptical and kind. I adjusted the mic because I have adjusted 100 times in school gyms, and I said, "My name is Margaret Green." The room hushed the way rooms do not immediately, but in waves. I saw Daniel take a step, then stop. The organizer smiled at me with a well-meaning impatience, the kind reserved for mothers at basketball games who stand too near the baseline. "I live in Westerville," I said. "I am a retired third-grade teacher. I grew up near a coffee can where my mother kept rainy-day bills. My husband and I bought a little house, and we paid it off the way teachers and plant workers and people do, slowly, with coupons and after-school extras and faith." I took the release of mortgage paper out of the clear sleeve and held it up. It felt both ridiculous and profound to be showing a piece of paper in a room where people like numbers better. "This," I said, "is the paper they give you when you've done a decent, ordinary thing. We hung it on our wall for a month. Then we put it in a folder because we are careful." I put it down. I took a breath that felt like the breath I took before telling parents their child needed help they weren't ready to hear about. In March, my son brought me to a notary. He told me it was a permit thing, an emergency contact thing. I touched the place on my cardigan, inside, where the ribbon lay against my skin, and felt both the scratch and the soft. It was not. It was a deed of trust on our home for a bridge loan I did not understand. The loan was for $700,000. The interest is 9.8%. The lender's name is Redwood. My name is on it as co-borrower. For 30 days, my son said. Tops. A rustle moved through the room, like wind through a church when a baby cries. Some faces closed, a few softened. One man looked at his shoes. Another scribbled on his pad, maybe a note, maybe a grocery list. I kept my voice even, the way you do when you intend to teach and not to scold. I know some of you are shaking your heads at me. You'd never, you say. You always, you say. Good. Hold that. Now listen to this. If you teach a young man to tell his mother a half-truth to grease a deal, you have taught him to lie. If your business model relies on a mother's signature obtained without comprehension, that is not entrepreneurship. That is exploitation dressed in Friday night networking. If you are Kyle, I turned and looked at him finally, saying his name like a sentence, and you inherit a mother's trust as part of your spreadsheet, you do not belong in any room where the word community is said. The organizer shifted. He started forward, then stopped, when the lawyer in the bicycle tie stood up from where I hadn't realized he'd been sitting and folded his arms, not a threat, but a presence. Ellen's pen scratched beside me like a cricket. I went on. I am not here to ask for money. I am not here to ask for pity. Pity is cheap. I am here to inform you of a line. Here it is. I will not sign anything else for my son. I will not mortgage my home to buy him a lesson he can only learn by standing in front of his own decisions. I have reported this to legal aid and to the Attorney General. I have asked Redwood for every recording they made of any call. If they call me, I will put them on speaker with my lawyer sitting beside me. If a notary puts a pen in my hand again without explaining what it is, I will take the pen and write my own words on it. No. Somewhere in the back, a chair scraped. Someone stood to leave and then sat again. A woman near the front nodded, slow, her eyes on me like we were two people at a kitchen table with coffee we'd forgotten to drink. I realized my heart had slowed, the way it does when you know you have walked through something without falling. I am telling you this in public because silence protects the wrong people. You talk here about building things, houses, wealth, futures. I did that in my way. I built a boy who won a Best Citizen ribbon in 3rd grade. I touched the ribbon, then took it out and pinned it to the outside of my sweater with my trembling hands. It looked absurd and perfect there, a small, bright claim. I do not know where that boy goes when fear sits beside him. I am calling him back. And I am asking you to look at your sons and your daughters and your mothers and ask yourselves tonight, what will I not ask? What will I refuse to take? Someone clapped. It was one sound, sharp, then more, a polite ripple that felt like water and not a victory parade. The organizer took a step, hesitant, then came forward with the smile he uses to move a schedule along. Thank you, Ms. Green, he said, careful, and turned to the room to say something about time and respect. I handed him the microphone and stepped down. Daniel was in the aisle before I'd reached the last step. He looked at the ribbon, and then at me, and then at the floor, as if it would tell him what came next. Kyle was not beside him. Kyle was already moving toward the exit, his phone to his ear, a performance of busy that excused him from decency. The lawyer slid in behind me like a quiet wall. Ellen appeared at my elbow with a bottle of water, the kind of organized that looks like love. "Mom," Daniel said. His voice had that ragged edge of a boy who has fallen and isn't sure he deserves to be helped up. "You didn't have to." "I did," I said. "I didn't touch him. I wanted to. I wanted to tuck his hair behind his ear the way I used to. But he is a man, and this is not a skinned knee. I won't pretend for you. Not anymore." He looked at the door where Kyle had gone. A few people watched us, pretending not to, their eyes doing that quick flick of human curiosity and awkward kindness. A woman came up, maybe in her 40s, steady eyes, no nonsense in her cardigan. "Ma'am," she said, "I'm an investor. I would like to apologize on behalf of not all of us, but the ones of us who know better and fail sometimes to say it out loud. If you need witnesses, you have them." She pressed a card into my hand with a name and a number, and the words, in small type, "Doing this without the lies." I put it in the good pocket in my purse. We left the room quietly, the way you leave a place where the air has changed. In the hallway, a man approached, hesitant. He had a notepad, but no card. "Ms. Green? I'm with the Dispatch. I come sometimes. Would you be willing to talk? Off the record, maybe?" I looked at him the way you look at someone asking to enter your home in a storm. "Maybe," I said, "but not tonight." Outside in the parking lot, the air was hot and smelled like cut grass and car exhaust. The stars fought the mall lights for space. Ellen unlocked her car. I stood for a minute, the clamor of the room leaking out of my ears. The ribbon on my chest made a tiny weight. I put my hand over it and felt my heart beat against the little circle of satin. On the way home, my phone buzzed with a number I recognized as Redwood's. Ellen glanced at me, a question. I hit speaker and let it ring twice before it connected. The voice was male, polite, rehearsed. "Ms. Green, this is Aaron from Redwood. We understand there was a situation at a meeting this evening. We wanted to extend our—" "Write it down," I said. The teacher's voice again, softened by habit and sharpened by necessity. "Send it to my lawyer. He will read your empathy and your terms. I am done with phones." There was a pause where you could hear a person reconsider a script. "Understood," he said. "We may be able to offer a forbearance contingent upon—" "Email," I said, and ended the call. I am not proud of that small power, but I'm also not ashamed. I have spent years choosing my words for other people's comfort. I am learning to choose them for my safety. The next day, Redwood sent 3 emails. One was a formal acknowledgement of our complaint and a statement that they were reviewing underwriting procedures. Another offered a 30-day forbearance with a fee attached that made me laugh, a small, astonished sound. The third, sent quietly late on a Friday, offered a significantly different fee and asked for a release of claims. The lawyer called me and said, "They are listening. That does not mean we are done." He walked me through the math and the law. He told me about affidavits and depositions, about a thing called a lease pendens that had alerted the card in my mailbox to my trouble. He told me we could negotiate without giving away my bones. I went to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office and asked questions I never wanted to ask, in a voice I recognized as adult. I filed the affidavit the clerk had mentioned, a simple page with my name, my age, my statement that I did not understand what I had signed. The desk officer did not make me feel foolish, and that felt like air. Days filled themselves. Daniel got a job with a contractor off Morse Road, the kind of place that fixes real problems one beam at a time. He came over sweaty and quiet, and he ate a plate of spaghetti at my table like he could taste again. He told me he had called Kyle and said words I am not sure he had ever said, no. He told me he was selling his truck. He told me he was going to the city to ask about the failed inspections himself. He told me he had made an appointment with a counselor a friend of his wife's knew. I poured him iced tea and thought how we are all repairable if we want to be. On Sunday, the pen in my purse bled a little onto a receipt, and I didn't mind. At church, a woman I barely knew hugged me too long, and I let her. Pastor Susan wove a sermon out of the loaves and fishes, and I wrote in the margin of the bulletin, "I am a loaf, not the basket." When the service ended, Mrs. Alvarez pressed a little paper pouch into my hand. It held a tiny medal with the word courage on one side and a smooth blank on the other, waiting for a thumb. I put it in my pocket next to the red pen and the ribbon for a minute before returning the ribbon to its place on the frame at home. Some symbols you wear when you need them. Some you put back where they remind you of the work that remains. A week later, a process server knocked on my door and handed me a stack of papers for Kyle. He had tried to slip away. He had not. The man in the black polo looked embarrassed. "Do you know him?" he asked. I pointed across the street where Ellen's rhododendrons were showing off. "I know good people," I said. "I manage the rest." I am not naive enough to believe that one speech in a carpeted conference room changes a lender's policy. I am not so cynical to think it means nothing. An older man who had stood with his arms crossed approached me in the parking lot after the meeting. He told me he had a son and a mother and a line too, and that he had almost crossed it last year. He said he would call her tonight. I put that in my pocket beside the pen, like a found coin. The days kept coming. I made lists and then crossed items off. I called the Ohio Attorney General's office and spoke to a woman named Teresa, who told me who else to call and which forms to fill out. I froze my credit and helped Ellen freeze hers even though she didn't need to. Friendship is sometimes prophylactic. I called the Franklin County Auditor's office and made sure my homestead exemption was in place. I learned the difference between the county recorder and the county clerk. I learned that language can be a shelter or a blade depending on who holds it. I am not a crusader by nature. I am a woman who knows how to assemble a bulletin board with butcher paper and kindness. But when the choice was between a quiet surrender and a loud boundary, I found the sound in me. The moments of humiliation didn't stop. A relative called and suggested, in that tone that turned suggestion into condemnation, that I had always coddled Daniel. A neighbor with a lawn service left a flyer and a note that said, in handwriting that meant to be sweet, "If you need to sell quickly, I have buyers." The bank sent a letter addressed to me and a Mr. Thomas Green, a little cruelty of automation. Each time I folded the paper and put it in a folder labeled, now, simply, evidence, not only for lawyers, for me. The last week of the 30 days, Redwood sent an agreement we could live with, a forbearance that did not break me to buy time for the sale of the houses that were real and not the ones men talk about. The lawyer nodded and said, "This is decent." He made sure we did not sign away the right to tell the truth. We did not. A buyer closed on West Mound. The Clintonville bungalow found a couple who wanted small rooms and a big maple. When the wire hit, I sat in my kitchen with the windows open and the smell of cut grass and lemon cleaner mingling in the air, and I let my shoulders drop an inch. Not victory, not yet, but not drowning. Daniel came over with a receipt in his pocket and dirt under his nails that he had not earned at the gym. He stood in my doorway, that line again, and looked at me. He reached into his backpack and took out the red striped straw he had saved from his first post-work chocolate shake and set it on the counter the way a boy sets treasures down. "I told the guys I couldn't do the next deal unless I could do it without your name," he said. "They looked at me like I'd turned down a fishing trip. I told them to teach me to do the work. I told them the thing you said." He swallowed, 30-something and 6 at once. "The thing about not asking your mother." I walked over to the mantel where the ribbon had gone back to its corner. I lifted the frame and cleaned the little dust at the top with my sleeve. I hung it straight. Then I took the release of mortgage out of its sleeve and traced Tom's signature with a finger the way you trace a child's sleeping cheek. Maybe one day I will put these papers into a fire and not think twice. Not yet. For now, I keep them in my folder. Paper to paper, truth to truth. The plan I made was not glamorous. Phone calls, forms, meals, walks, sleep, a few brave speeches. It did not end with a movie swell of music. It ended with me standing on my porch at dusk, watching lightning bugs write their brief letters in the air and feeling the steady hum of the fridge in my bones. It ended with me deciding each morning to remain the woman who stirs a pot of coffee and reads a mystery and calls her friend and makes a list, and also the woman who can stand in a room and say no. It ended with a ribbon inside my sweater against my heart, while I told strangers how not to break it. I do not know if I have rescued anything. Rescue is a big word. But I have set down burdens I did not deserve to carry and refused to pick up new ones people tried to hand me as if they were favors. I have said to my son that love is not a signature, and to myself that dignity is not a luxury. The house smells like lemon cleaner again, ordinary and right. The board in the hallway still creaks. The calendar squares still get their small X's. I am not calmer so much as clearer. Before bed, I place the small stone that says wisdom on the release of mortgage in the folder, not to weigh it down, but to add my words to the record of my life. In the morning, I will carry my red pen in my purse, not because I expect to grade anyone's paper, but because it reminds me that my voice leaves a mark. In the morning, I will pour coffee and hum along with the radio and make a call or two. I will walk at Hoover and count the geese and remember that stubbornness can glow. I will think of that room at Polaris and the faces in it and hope one of them called their mother. I will think of my son on a job site with wood and nails and the humble honesty of sweat. And if another envelope comes, and it might, I will open it at my own table with my own hands and read it with all the patience a teacher gives to a child who rushes through. I will call Ellen. I will call the lawyer. I will set the kettle on and hold the little medal that says courage in one hand and the ribbon in the other, and I will decide what next small thing is mine to do. There is no bridge I will cross for someone else if it drops away beneath my own feet. There is, though, a boy I will keep calling back toward shore, and a home I will stand in front of if I have to, not because it is wood and paper and money, but because it is where my life echoes true. There is, though, a boy I will keep calling back toward shore, and a home I will stand in front of if I have to, not because it is wood and paper and money, but because it is where my life echoes true. The morning after the meeting at Polaris, the house felt different in the way that matters. Quieter, but not empty. The kind of quiet that holds space for what's next instead of hiding fear under the rug. I made coffee, and the kettle sang the same old song. The wisdom stone sat on the release of mortgage, heavy and familiar, and when I picked it up, I caught the faint imprint of Tom's thumb on the photograph beside it and felt a soft steadying like a hand at my shoulder. The phone on the counter lit up with numbers I'd been watching for. Redwood called, as they had promised, and the voice on the line talked like someone who had been moved to learn the correct words. They offered a written forbearance, clearer than the first, light on strings, and a promise to review internal procedures. The lawyer read it with his thin bicycle tie and smiled like a man who had balanced two scales. They listened, he said, but I had learned that listening is not the same as repair. Still, a forbearance meant breathing room. It meant we three could live long enough to make better choices. There were other calls, too. The woman from the local paper left a voicemail asking if I would come by for a short interview. The reporter wanted to know how it felt to speak to a room full of people who'd once applauded the very tactic that almost cost me my house. A neighbor sent a text with a photo of a casserole she was dropping off. The caption read, "We're here, Maggie." Pastor Susan called twice and read me a line from Ecclesiastes I'd always liked, "To everything there is a season," and told me this was clearly not the season for hiding. Even Jim the mailman walked past with a wave, the same man who'd handed me the certified letter and pretended not to see my hydrangeas quiver. Daniel came over that afternoon with a pair of work boots he'd bought at a place on Morse Road. His jeans had dust at the hem and grease on his fingers, and when he sat at my kitchen table, he looked like someone learning how to be steady the hard way. He set a paper down in front of him, proof of sale, receipts, a list he'd written in pencil, and it looked like homework for his life. He didn't ask for money. He asked for a place where truth could be practiced. "I called Kyle," he said, after the polite small talk about the weather. "I told him I wasn't going to bring you into our mess again. He laughed at first. Then he told me to grow up. He gave a small, bitter laugh. I told him I was already trying. I heard he left early, I said, and it was not a judgment so much as a question about where decency had fled. He did, Daniel said. Left town, probably. He's got ways, Mom. He's good at disappearing. He looked at his hands, and they trembled just a little, the way they used to when he was building model airplanes as a boy in the living room and the glue had been too sticky. I filed a complaint with the city about the failed inspections. I'm on the contractor's payroll now. It's not glamour, but at the end of a week there's a roof that doesn't leak. He told me he'd started seeing a counselor who knows the kind of pride that's afraid to be small and the kind of guilt that keeps people stuck. He told me he'd made a list of things he would apologize for and another list of things he would actually do differently. He said the words I had longed to hear. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't think. I thought I could fix it like I always fixed other things. It was the apology of a man who had finally taken in what repair looked like. Slow, practical, sometimes humbling. He did not expect me to erase what had been done, and neither did I. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means recognizing when someone is willing to carry the weight they put on you. We repaired other small things. We repainted the corner of the porch together, that ugly place the squirrels had gnawed. Daniel sanded, and I held the brush steady when his hands were too shaky. He bought tomato plants from the Saturday market downtown and planted them under the kitchen window where the sun hits in the afternoon. He paid me back in tiny installments from the money from the Westmound sale, not because he could cover $700,000 in a night, but because he wanted a ledger he could show himself he was honorable about. He worked at the contractors and came home smelling of sawdust and honest labor, and he slept deeper. The Attorney General's office did open an inquiry into a few of the practices Redwood had used. Someone from their Consumer Protection Division called and asked me a dozen quiet, serious questions. I handed over my copies, the recordings we had, the notary's log printout. They asked if I would testify about the meeting at Polaris and about the handwritten affidavit I'd filed at the recorder's office. If it helps other people, I said, because my instinct is always the classroom instinct. If my story might keep another mother from signing away her peace, then I will tell it. There were moral consequences, too. A man at the meeting, one of those older fellows who cross his arms and keeps his head down until the right moment, took the card from me and later sent an email saying he refused to go to another networking meeting without a disclosure script that made clear what a signature meant. I don't know if he'll keep his word forever, but he called his mother that night and asked if she needed anything. I took that as a small repayment. Word travels in suburbs, through church kitchens and PTA faculty lounges, through the cadence of casseroles passed over fences. A few teachers at my old school, I still go back sometimes to see the children I used to greet on the first day, said they'd used my speech as a lesson about consent and contracts in their middle school life skills class. One of them had a laminated copy of the red pen rules I used to scrawl in essays. Read the assignment. Ask questions. Don't sign anything you don't understand. Somehow, my messy, painful thing became an old lesson shared again, like a cozy sweater that actually fit. There were awkward moments. A cousin I hadn't spoken with in years called and suggested delicately that perhaps I had been too soft on Daniel all his life. I took a breath and explained how decades of small yeses and quiet nos had built our family in the only way we knew how. She did not call back. But I also received a bouquet from a woman whose son had proven himself decent and steady and who wrote, "Thank you for saying what needed saying," on the card in curling script. That card went on the fridge next to the scholarship notice from the library for a reader's program. Life, the way it actually is, remained a messy ledger of human attempts. The house stayed mine. The wires came through for Westmound. Clintonville found someone who adored the old bungalow's quirks. They wanted the quirks that make a house a home, and were not buying fantasies of instant flipping. The money went to the bank. We negotiated terms that did not press me into immediate ruin, and the deed that had hung over my head like an accusation loosened. Redwood settled with a forbearance that allowed time for the closings, and in the small, very precise way of paperwork, my name was released from immediate risk. I kept the release of mortgage with Tom's printed signature in the folder, and when I turned the paper under the lamp, it looked like the quiet evidence of staying steady. We cauterized other vulnerabilities. I called the county auditor and made sure our homestead exemption was properly filed and up to date. I froze my credit out of habit and helped Ellen do the same. She laughed and called me a mother of the neighborhood after that. I met with a financial counselor at the library who drew charts on butcher paper and showed me a plan that did not rely on heroics. It was boring and sensible and exactly what I wanted. The plan included a small emergency fund and a list of people I could call that were not family, professionals who could be blunt and kind. There is a particular calm in knowing which number to call when the heart races, and I learned that like I learned the names of children in my class. There was a legal resolution of a sort. Kyle was named in the complaint, and, in the hum of discovery, other properties and patterns came to light. He moved away, rumors said to another state, and eventually was ordered in a civil suit to pay a modest restitution that was not romantic or satisfying, and yet helped the city take more notice of these practices. The AG's office published a small press release about increased oversight and slightly tighter disclosure requirements. It was not a revolution, but it was a change. I find that wins in life rarely come as thunderclaps. They come as slow adjustments, as policy reviews and better training at notary services, as one more notary who speaks plainly, and one more mother who asks, "What does this line mean?" My relationship with Daniel changed shape. We learned new rhythms. There were mornings he would bring me a coffee from the shop on State Street, someone who remembered I liked the bitter, no frills, and we'd sit on the porch and talk about small things that weren't taxes or lawsuits. He came to choir practice once, offered to help move chairs for the pageant, and I saw him there being gentle with Mrs. Alvarez's cane. He started to laugh again, in a way that wasn't thin. One evening, months after the wires cleared and the forbearance concluded, he brought me a small box wrapped in butcher paper. Inside was the red-striped straw he'd kept from his first post-work chocolate shake, clean and placed on tissue paper like a relic. "I kept this," he said, "to remember where I want to be." "You kept a straw?" I said, which is what my mother would have called a laugh, and we both did, small and bright. "That one," he said, "and the rest." He told me he wanted to be the kind of man who could build a house and stand beside it without leaning on someone else for the foundation. He wanted, he said, to be someone who called his mother before he needed her signature. We did not return to exactly who we had been. There was no magical erasing of behavior. People keep the marks of the things that teach them. But there was repair, and there was the slow, steady practice of a new covenant between us. My role shifted from fixer to witness, from bridge to beacon. If that sounds austere, it felt like justice. He would make mistakes, I am sure, people do. But I trusted that he had seen enough of what a bad solution looked like to avoid it. In quiet moments, I found myself holding the wisdom stone and the little best citizen ribbon together, one in the palm of my hand, one pinned close to my heart. The stone was not heavy because it weighed me down. It was heavy because it reminded me of gravity, the gravity of knowing what is yours to take and what is yours to refuse. The ribbon, once tucked secretly inside my sweater, had made its way back to the frame. Sometimes I leave it on the mantel. Sometimes I wear it when I need the small proof that a child I helped raise could still be coaxed back to honesty. The ribbon and the stone had become a pair of small metaphors. Tenderness and wisdom can coexist. Love and boundaries can sit side by side. There were other small joys. I went back to the sewing nook and finished a quilt I'd been working on for ages. A patchwork of gingham and florals and a square of blue that reminded me of an OSU sweatshirt Tom used to wear. I gave the quilt to the church's newborn ministry, and the woman there cried like the way people cry when something ordinary makes sense. I went to a Buckeyes game with Ellen one crisp autumn afternoon. No expensive nosebleeds, just two friends, hot dogs, and the satisfying stomp of a crowd. And I laughed until my sides hurt. I planted peonies that bloomed even after a freak May frost. In the small seasons of life, these were the stitches that mended the fabric. A reporter did write a piece. It ran on the local paper's website and later on a regional Sunday column. The headline was tidy and a little blunt, but the story inside told our small, stubborn truth. People wrote emails, some thanking me for speaking out, others confessing their own hushes, and a few, unexpectedly, offering help. One woman whose son had gone through rehab offered a list of counselors. A retired banker offered a short, straightforward financial workshop at the library. A man I hadn't seen since PTA days stopped me at a school fundraiser and said he had called his daughter and told her something he'd been meaning to say: "Don't sign without understanding." The seasons moved as seasons do. The maples on our street put on the slow orange show and then shedded in a sweep. The calendar still hangs on the wall, and I still mark the days with little X's. But now I mark other things too. Appointments with a financial planner, Daniel's haircut days when he comes by and we share a pot roast, the library's summer reading kickoff. I keep the folder labeled House with the documents inside and the wisdom stone perched on top, not because I want to live in paper, but because paper remembers what the heart sometimes hides. When people ask me how I feel about the whole thing now, the answer is not simple, which is to say, it is honest. I feel grateful for the ordinary things that steadied me: the coffee, the creak of the hallway board, the humming refrigerator, and for the people who stayed, like Ellen and Pastor Susan and the lawyer with the bicycle tie who sat through my story like a friend. I feel sorrow for the way my son learned to take shortcuts. I feel a particular kind of pride that is not flashy at all. The pride of someone who speaks a hard truth out loud and watches how it changes a room. The object that started it, the small stone etched with wisdom, has become more to me than a paperweight. I keep it on the folder not only because it steadies the papers, but because it steadies decisions. When a letter comes, I put the kettle on, bring the envelope to the table, and touch the stone before I read. It is a ritual now, a tiny liturgy of consulting my own head and heart. The ribbon is still pinned to the mantel most days. I sometimes unpin it and tuck it near my heart when I walk into rooms that might tempt me into an old pattern. The mother who covers too much, the teacher who smooths every student's mistakes. It is a reminder that boundaries can be tender and that protection is not the opposite of love. This is not a tale of perfect reformation, nor is it a moralizing sermon. It is simply the story of a woman who chose, day by day, to be clear about what she would carry and what she would not. It is the story of a son who learned that bravery sometimes looks like asking for help before it is too late, and a community that, in pieces, chose to do better. On an evening when the light slanted gold across the kitchen table and the smell of lemon cleaner had faded into the clean air of routine, Daniel and I sat and watched the geese fly across Hoover Reservoir, their long black shapes stitching the sky into a V. He reached over and took my hand, the same warm, calloused hand he'd held as a child when the world felt large and a little dangerous. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" I asked, and he looked at his fingers, my chin, the small lifeline in his palm, and then at me. "For not doing it for me," he said, "for making me stand there in front of the work. There is a kind of quiet gratitude that does not ask for trophies." He meant it. I squeezed his hand back, and we watched the geese find their way. If anything in my story touches you, if you have stood at the kitchen table with a paper you did not understand, or if you have been the person who needed to be taught a harder lesson, I hope you will let me know in the comments. Tell me what you carried and what you chose to set down. If you found the small courage of this story useful, please give it a like so it can reach another mother or son or neighbor who is learning the same truth. And if you want to hear more about these real, slow victories, the quilt squares, the stubborn geese, the policy nudges, subscribe so we can keep the conversation going and remind each other, quietly and often, how to say no without losing the people we love. I will keep putting my pen to paper, and when the day comes, I have to open another envelope. I will do it at my own table, with my own coffee, and with the wisdom stone and the ribbon close at hand. Reminders that a life can be both tender and firm, and that sometimes the most brave thing is to refuse to be the bridge someone else built their plans on.